Entozaki Shange is American Shakespeare. Her work is right up there. It is canon. It is American theater canon, but I dare say it is just theater canon. For Colored Girls, it's meant to be performed. Yes, you can read it and study it and theorize about it, but it's supposed to be performed on stage. You're supposed to see it live, breathing, so that you can laugh, so that you can cry, so that you can respond.
Hello, and welcome to Keyboard. I am Tembi, and today's guest is actor, director, and educator Fatima Quander. Fatima has spent 20 years in the world of live theater, and in our conversation, we get into her artistic beginnings, the role that technology plays in her creative process, and where she began using theater as a tool for social change. We also talk about her passion for centering Black women in her work, and so much more. Don't let me hold you. Let's get into it. Welcome, Fatima Quander.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. Let's jump in. Okay, so tell us about your first experience with theater. What do you remember about that? Walk us through that.
Okay. So I've been thinking about this question and I'm like, what is the real answer? The real answer is actually like a little classroom play that I did in second grade. That was like my first inclination of like, oh, this is a thing. But and it was like, I don't even know who I played. I remember there was a Billy Goat's Gruff song that I wanted to sing, but I wasn't one of the Billy Goat's Gruff, but that's all I remember. And I remember we did this cool thing where we had these closets in the back of the classroom, and we used that to enhance the storytelling that we would bust out of the closet and like do a scene and then go back in the closet. And I remember that was like really cool. But I remember at 7 years old, I was really a bit over the top on like, we need to take our coats out of the closet because it looks messy. So I wanted to look neat when we opened the closet. And I'm sure my teacher thought I was doing too much, but that was like my Libra sentiment at 7 years old. So that was like my first like real like my truthful experience with theater, but the thing that I count the most because it was like the most intentional was actually my sophomore year in high school, where we had to do this what was called the Sophomore Shakespeare Festival, and the English classes would pick a play, and across the classes they would present the majority of a play, and my class was doing The Tempest. And I was Ariel in The Tempest, and I was so scared. I didn't know why we were doing this. I thought it was just too much work and I had to memorize it. It was terrifying. And then, like, the curtain went up and the audience was responding to what I was doing. And I was able to have like a real back and forth understanding and conversation with the audience. So even though second grade was my first play, junior year in high school was my first realization that this could be something that I could pursue and get something out of. So that was my first true awareness.
And in second grade, you were already behaving like a director.
I was.
Mm-hmm.
I was.
Mm-hmm. Like, this is not right. We need to get this together before we begin again.
It's true. It's true. And I also, like I said, I remember the Billy Goat's Gruff song, but I don't even remember my part because I wanted to do that part, but I don't know what my part was. I don't remember.
It's immaterial. You just knew it's time for me to start this path because this is what I'm going to be doing, right?
Yes, for sure.
Yes. In your work as an actor, what kinds of roles have you found most interesting?
Yes. I find that I really like researching. I like things that are, if they're not all the way based in history, that I can at least do some research surrounding the time period or the region or, whatever themes that are being discussed in the play, because I think having that background historical knowledge just helps me make stronger choices that I feel comfortable in. Last summer, I did a play. I did two short plays with Voices Festival production here in DC. And one of them, they were both new plays written by Rachel Lynette. And one of them was Letters for Kamala. And it followed three women, three American women from American political history, speaking to Kamala Harris on the eve of election 2020. And when we did this play, we closed in the end of June. It was actually before Kamala even became the presidential nominee. So we were speaking, thinking about the election that was coming, but not yet knowing that she was the one that we were going to be promoting, we meaning the actors. And the character I played was Charlene Mitchell, who was the first Black woman to run for president with the Communist Party. So she wasn't one of the major parties because everyone, attributes that to Shirley Chisholm, but she actually ran for president before with the Communist Party, and she was just an amazing, outspoken politician. She was actually best friends with Angela Davis. And in researching that role and watching old video footage and such, I admit that I was actually quite embarrassed that I had never heard of her before. And then I'm seeing these pictures of Angela Davis, and she was in all of them. So I had seen her before and not really known her name. But in that process, being able to research her life and watch videos and work to follow her speech pattern, she spoke very the way she spoke was so interesting. She was from Chicago. She was born and raised in the Midwest. And then her adulthood was in California, but she also spent time in New York. And the way she spoke was influenced by all these different regions. And she also had this like dentalized way that she would speak, where it was happening in the front of her mouth and it was very nasal. But then some words would just sound really New York. And it was just for me really fascinating to approach the character starting with that because I found it made it a lot easier for me to just get outside of my own way and outside of my own head where I could just practice the way she was speaking and then start to make choices from that point of view. So anything that involves research and studying the mannerisms of somebody else, I find that that really supports the choices in my process.
You illuminated something that I think is so important in developing a character, developing a relationship with the text of a piece, which is research, right? That you talked about. It's so interesting how in theater you can learn so much about something that you never even knew was in existence just by researching a particular character. And I just wonder, do you tend to find pieces where there's some sort of new revelation made more interesting as a character versus maybe somebody you already knew about, you're familiar with, and you're just having fun with exploring a character?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because I think with the research and just understanding the context and where they are coming from, it it helps create the full picture and the full journey. So that even though I'm looking towards history, I'm able to make informed choices as an actor based off of what could have been going through their mind at that time. So I'm still able to use my own imagination and my own creation with the ensemble and the director, but it is coming from a solid place, a solid understanding instead of just, putting my own thought on like, if this was me, I would do this. I'm able to think more deeply about, well, if this was her, what could she have said? How might she have responded? And I can put that into the choices I make.
That really adds a layer of authenticity to the performance that gives it more texture, which is really
Yeah.
interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah, when you take your actor hat off though, and you put your director hat on, there's a whole different creative process, I'm assuming. But I want to know what even led you to directing besides being that second grader and saying, you know what? We need to get this whole picture together because I feel like you're not seeing the bigger scope here.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because for me, I never take off my actor hat when I'm directing. I approach directing from the standpoint of an actor. I'm an actor first. And as a director, I always want to serve the ensemble and trust the choices of my actors and have that collaboration as a part of the process. So like truthfully, I never actively pursued directing projects. They just kind of came my way. And I took advantage of them when they came my way. And because I've worked with students for so many years, directing was just a natural progression, to help them with whatever culminating project that they were doing. And then I found that I really, really enjoyed it. So even though in the rehearsal room, I'm looking at the scene work and what the actors are doing from an actor's point of view and asking them questions and trying to get their input. When I think of the big picture, for me, that usually comes way early on in the process when I'm talking with the designers and trying to figure out what it'll look like and what it'll feel like, so that I already have a strong sense of that world that I can then, help the actors know that, like, this is what it will look like, this is what the set will be and the costumes will be, so they can envision that for themselves and see how that informs the choices that they make in the rehearsal room. But in terms of like the process in the rehearsal room, I'm not the director that has everything blocked beforehand and you go here, you go there. Like that's not me because I know as an actor, I don't like that. So I usually, whether I'm with students or professionals, I'll usually just say, "Well, give it a go. Let's see what you think. Let's see, follow your impulses, and then I'll see where they are, and then from there." Because of my Libra mindset, then I can just kind of clean it up and make it look a little bit nicer and a little bit more pretty. But the instincts are coming from what the actors are doing themselves.
I love that. So you don't take your actor hat off. You relate to the actors from an actor's perspective, and I'm sure that they respect that and appreciate that more because they know you get them.
Yeah, always, and I find that especially working with young actors, actors that are still in their university program, this helps them figure out how to be an artist because I don't want my students to ever feel that they are just a chess piece that is moved about the stage based off of somebody's vision that they have nothing to do with. So this is how I help my students figure out things for themselves. And if they really don't know what to do, then of course they can ask me and I can help them clarify the choice or the idea or to see if what they're doing even makes sense or is supporting their overall journey. But it is important to me for my student actors to make their own choices and find their own way as it relates to everybody else because when they graduate, I don't want them to be in a rehearsal room completely without ideas, just wanting to be told everything, because that's not going to set them up to be a positive, like working professional with if a director is like, well, this person needs their hand held all the time. So even, in our rehearsal room, I understand that they are learning and figuring things out, but I still want to give them room to make choices and I can help them ask the questions so that they can make those choices that will serve them. But I also depend very heavily on what they are bringing themselves.
You went to Beloit for undergraduate,
Yes.
and you said that when you were at Beloit, you were introduced to the idea of using theater to create social change. So, can you talk about how you were introduced to it, and then how has that seed grown in your career?
Yes, yes. So, my mentor from Beloit, who I still am in conversation with to this day, I just saw her last summer at the AFA conference, and we still communicate. Her name is Professor Amy Sarno, and she was a new-ish professor when I was at Beloit 20 some years ago. I can't believe it. And she was the one that introduced me to the notion of using theater to make a social or political commentary. She had a class, I don't remember what it was called, but she had a class where we were studying, Augusto Boal and Theater of the Oppressed and Grotowski and all of these theater makers from around the world that were using various techniques to like oral storytelling, things, that come from just West African traditions in general and Indian traditions. We had this class where we were just studying all these theater greats and how they were able to use storytelling and performance to affect positive change in their immediate communities and how using these theater techniques empowered the people to vote or protest or learn to read or volunteer at the local school and just speak out and become active participants in their own success, and the success of their immediate communities. And that always just stuck with me, that yes, I love to go see a good show and to watch it and be, engulfed in the moment and then go home and be like, it was fun. But to me, it's more important for people to be called to act, after they see a show, to think about something and to have these conversations and then, go to the library and check out a book or volunteer or speak to a child or something. Because while I know that there is a place for art's sake, and that, sometimes we just want to experience something that is pleasant, I think it's an important tool for our cultural understanding. And that's something that I started at Beloit, but very much still exists in everything that I do. There's always a character or an overall theme where I hope people, when they're coming to see my plays, whether I'm an actor or director or whatever, coming to see and know that they have to think about this and that hopefully they have to do better in their own lives as a result of it.
That's beautiful. And connected to that is the fact that you love to center Black women in your work. That's very important to you. And so, how do you keep us at the heart of your practice? How does that show up in your acting, directing, teaching, centering Black women?
Sure. I think it's funny because that is such a huge part of my work, but I don't know how not to do that because I am a Black woman and I don't exist in, a white Eurocentric lens. That is not my default. So I always think of like, how do I feel about this? Or people from my community, or what would my grandmother say about this? Or what would my niece think about this? And we are all Black women, whether we are of Caribbean, Spanish, English speaking, if we're, from the continent directly, whatever. I just, I don't know. I just don't exist in that the default that the white man is what is the focus of the conversation. I love to work with my friends. Like all the years that I worked with FRESHH Inc. Theater Company, I worked with them because they were my friends and because I trusted what they had to say. I trusted their artistic vision, and I felt that it was important for me to actively make a place for, Black girls, teenage girls, and for them to help them find their voice. So whether, a play that I didn't devise, or something that wasn't fresh related, I always feel that like the characters can be a Black person even if the playwright didn't think about that initially, and depending on who you cast, the audience may receive it a different way. But just because it didn't say that, in the cast of characters that this is a Black woman, doesn't mean that it can't be cast as a Black woman. So, like, I don't know, I feel like I'm failing at this question. Like, I don't even
No,
know
no.
how to speak about it because I just don't know how to undo my Black womanness. It shows up wherever I am, so it's going to show up in my work because that's who I am.
No, I love that you you answered that question quite eloquently. I think about a mentor of mine from some years back who recently passed away. He said to me, I was talking to him about some endeavor I was starting, and I was like trying to figure out how to call it the Black blah blah blah, and he was just like, "You're getting caught up on naming it and making sure that people know that it's Black, but whatever you do is Black. So just do it. You don't have to worry about calling it the Black blah blah blah." And that just makes me think about what you're saying, right? Like you can't unblack woman yourself. Of course, Black women are going to be the center of that. But I think the fact that you do make an effort, and maybe to you it's without thinking, but your work it's clear that the focus is on Black women, and Black women are centered because, like you said, though, typically the white male is the center, right? So it is different to see that for a lot of people, even though for us it's natural. If we're doing it as Black women, we're Black women. So I love that. It's like you
Mhm.
don't know how to undo it. And that just to me it just says that you're not infected with that thing that, unfortunately, even if we and our identities are Black or our identities are female, we still may not sit in that comfortably. And I love that you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, that reminds me of like when I was with FRESHH Inc. Theater Company, And we used to have the Next to Kin 10-minute play festival. It was a festival of new plays that were exploring themes of Afrofuturism inspired by Octavia Butler. And Goldie, our executive director and founder, would always, pose to the playwrights. They were our sister cipher writing circle. She would pose to the playwrights, what is it like to be in a world where blackness is not defined by whiteness, where womanness is not defined by maleness? What does it mean to be in a world where black women are free? And for some of our writers, they could just take that idea and run with it. And for some of our writers, it actually really challenged them. They didn't know how to speak and write in a world where the woman wasn't talking about something that the man had done to her. It was a very challenging realization for some of our writers on how to unlearn what all of these harms have done to how we see ourselves. And even though I'm thinking of one playwright in particular, even though she was in an environment that was welcoming and celebratory of the Black woman, it was very hard for her to make that separation, because for her whole life she had been told what to think and what to do and how Black women act. And she couldn't think beyond these binaries, really. And it was we had interesting conversations around it, but that is something that I just actively hope to not be confined by, because why should somebody else tell me who I am and how I act and how I think and how I speak and what I like and all of these things, because we're not a monolith. There's not one thing that defines Black womanhood, even though greater society will try to tell us that it is, but we know that that is not true. That is not true.
Amen. And the fact that you center your career in work that demonstrates that that's not true is so important. Now, you mentioned
Hmm.
Fresh, and we talked about Goldie Patrick. She's a force. Also a guest on Keyboard. Check it out. Check it out. Check out her episode as well. What was it like working with her? And what was it like, if you can just talk a little bit about Fresh as a company and as a movement and as a force?
Yeah, so those of you that are familiar with Keyboard, Goldie Patrick. Fresh was a Black hip hop theater company focused on sharing and celebrating and cultivating the stories of Black women and girls in theater. And really to work with Goldie was to work with all the good things it is to work with family. Sometimes family is a little bit too much, but we didn't have that in Fresh. We had just like a comfort and a culture that was in celebration of all that Black women are. And, we had our Griot Girls, which were our teenager social activism and performance ensemble. We had the Sister Cipher, was the Black Women's Writing Circle, and the Vanguard, which is what I led, were the Black Women's Performing Ensemble. And it was just such a joy to be able to go to work every day and read plays and support, the rehearsal process or the classroom process for the Griot girls. And I think that in the moment, Fresh, we sunset during COVID, but in the moment, I knew even then how special it was, even though I was caught in the day to day of trying to get things done. But the fact that, you can come into the office and have Queen Latifah just like blasting in the background, and that's just normal. And to sit there and know that there's like literally a plate of now laters on the table for you to just eat during the meeting and talk and process and, show up with your dill pickle and just be like, girl, where you get that from? And it was just so Black, but it was just the norm. And like I said, even though I was in the moment, I would sometimes feel like I was coming outside of the moment to just recognize, like, wow, this is really special that we can all just show up here and be ourselves, no matter where we're coming from, and know that we are all in support of each other and the work. And there wasn't any backstabbing or any of that stuff that they try to say that we are like. There was none of that. It was true love and true joy and just laughter. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful experience. And because I know that that can exist. I use the philosophies of Fresh in all of the work that I do. I want my rehearsal rooms to be joyful, and even though we are challenged by the work that we do, we know that we are coming with from a place of love and in celebration. And I take that directly from my time with Fresh.
That's incredible. When I talked to Goldie, she talked a lot about how you all structured that safe space for the women, for the girls, for yourselves, which was so important. And I acknowledge to her, and I'll acknowledge to you now that being an audience member, being present for your productions, also felt safe to me as a Black woman.
Hmm.
Centering us
Hmm.
was just so important, and it felt that I felt that when I was at any of your performances. And there's a difference because theater is a white dominated field. And so a lot of times you may find yourself being the only Black person or the only Black woman on a project. And that's not the same feeling, as pleasant as it may be. If people can be perfectly nice, but it's different when you feel yourself being centered and you're surrounded by other Black women. So I just thank you for all the work that you did and all that you gave of yourself to the process to make us all feel safe.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, it was Goldie and the team, and even though Fresh is no longer actively, an active theater company anymore, there are, the descendants of Fresh that are just around all the time. Even like last semester when we had the Black Theater and Dance performance, I mean the Black Theater and Dance Symposium at University of Maryland, we had a refresh panel, which were people that were from Fresh that were sharing works in progress, plays of Afrofuturism. And even for Color Girls closing night, I had no idea, but I had the Griot girls, who are now Griot adults, show up to the show.
Oh,
Like eight
wow.
of them show up to the show. And I was like, y'all are
Beautiful.
grown, so it lives on through these people that still have this family, this sisterhood, and are still intentional with what they write and how they present their work and how they show up for each other. So even though the company itself is no longer in existence, it is very much around and moving forward.
You said earlier that the process of creating and building family with Fresh, there wasn't any backstabbing. There wasn't that whole narrative that gets pushed about Black women versus we see in media today. There's this sort of curated storytelling of Black women going at each other's throats. And it's interesting to consider why that would be so prominent and why that would be pushed forward versus something like a Fresh, something where Black women are nurturing each other. And and it just makes me wonder how we can take more control over that narrative because, as you said, Black women are not a monolith. And we have Black women in a lot of cases who are creating these kinds of entities that don't show Black women in, I don't want to say in a positive light because that implies that we're focusing on the white gaze, right? But even just to
Hmm.
us, right? Not
Yeah,
centering us still and saying if young Black women see adult Black women behaving a certain way, they're going to obviously assume that that's an acceptable way to behave versus what I talked
yeah.
about in feeling, being at a Fresh production or a Fresh gathering. And so I love how you talk about it still lives on through the women because the women who were the girls then had models for themselves. They saw a way of being a Black woman that wasn't real whatever of whatever place. And that's
Hmm.
so important, that mentorship, that presence of Black women existing in greatness and not in negativity. So it's really,
Yeah,
really
yeah.
powerful.
We got a text the other day, because Goldie and Ayana and I, we still have, our own email text chain. But yeah, we got a text message with one of our Griot girls who is now in her mid-20s, and she and another one are assistant stage managing a project, and Sister Brianda Minix, is in the cast, and Brianda was one of our women who was in the Sister Cipher in the Vanguard, and they were texting us basically saying like we cannot believe that we are working on a project with Sister Brianda, and like we admired her and revered her and we learned from her, and now are in the same room as colleagues, and they were just so emotional and had to share with us. So the fact that they are now growing up and growing into their artistry and into their womanhood, and knowing that they have a community that is excited to work with them and welcoming them, it just lives on. It lives on.
That's so powerful and so important for us as Black women to make sure we surround Black girls with what they need to be safe in this world that's always trying
Hmm.
to kill us. You've
Hmm.
devised you've devised theater, explored hip hop theater. You've worked with verse, live digital theater, all these different forms. Can you talk about the different kind of audience reactions and engagements and what forms you find more interesting with regards to the audience's role in the process?
Hmm. 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 How do the audience react to these different forms? I would say the audience reacts positively. You know, no matter what you're working on, if you're doing hip hop theater, there's some people in the audience that are hip hop heads that are definitely coming to celebrate the culture. And then there are people that are coming that are just coming to see a show and may need a little bit more time to tune their ear to, lyrics or to poetry or a cadence or something. But I think that the end result is the same in terms of like all of it is storytelling, and maybe some uses music and maybe some uses a sound or beat or visual storytelling, but all of it is to inform whatever the story is of the play. So no matter how you're sharing the story, I think that as long as that is clear and the conflict is clear and what the journey of the characters are, as long as you are still intentional with that, feel like the audience is responds positively, whether they understand that medium or not. When we have digital theater, for example, a lot of people think that digital theater is just projections on stage or live film capture on stage, but there are so many different elements that are marks of digital theater. One of the things that I was doing when I directed A Bicycle Country by Nilo Cruz at University of Maryland is we didn't have projections on stage, but we had like live actor response to like video interaction where we had so the play itself, it takes place in Cuba in 1993 before the U.S. intervention on Cuban rafters. And Act One takes place on land. It follows three characters during this special period in Cuba that are realizing that the country is just out of resources and um, are they're needing to think beyond the island. And then so it's very Act One is steeped in the reality. In Act Two, they are drifting on a raft in the middle of the ocean heading towards the United States. And Act Two is steeped in magical realism and fantasy, where they start to hallucinate because they are dehydrated, because they're out in the sun, and they don't know what is real from what is not real. So in Act Two, we were exploring all of these different elements of video response, where the performers were in conversation with the digital technologies on stage. For example, one of the actors had these little sensors that were sewn into her costume. So in one of her hallucinations, she steps outside of the boat, and the sensor that was in her costume was connected to these cameras that were actually in the space. So when she stepped outside of the boat and touched the floor, which was the water, we see the water respond and move according to where she was stepping. So some of it was like algae luminescence and neon, and some of it was the water itself, but it was a way that we were able to explore the magical realism and the fantasy of her hallucination. And the audience was right there, was right there. They weren't necessarily like, oh, she stepped on the stage, it's not water. They saw her as going into the water and descending into the water. And they were actually really, really moved by it. So even though we had these technologies that were enhancing the storytelling, you are you believe it. You're not just thinking of her on the stage, you're thinking of her like going lower, lower, lower and drowning. And the audience is right there with you because the focus of the storytelling and what is actually going on was so rich by what the actors were doing. So, for these digital components in particular, I always want to make sure that they are in conversation with the actors and that it's not just an experience of like, look, we have all this cool stuff that we're doing, because we don't want the technology to overwhelm the live performance, because what's the point of that? I don't want to create Times Square on stage. I wanted to be there in support of the story. So I feel like the audience still responds really positively because the story is intact and the technical and digital elements make sense to support what is going on. It doesn't need to be huge and over the top in order to be effective.
That's really interesting using the technology to enhance the story in that way through the sensors and the actor's costume. I feel like that's a whole other podcast episode to just talk about the different ways, that technology can be implemented in live theater. And I think your point about not overwhelming the actors, not oversaturating with technology to the point where, like you said, it's Times Square versus supporting the story and supporting the theatrical experience, because live theater, as we know, has to compete with technology that where people can watch something in their hand. And okay, why do I want to go all the way out and spend all the money if I can just stream whatever? So it's really interesting
Hmm.
to be able to use technology to enhance and enrich the experience in live theater. And I definitely want to talk more about that at a point that's so fascinating. So you've co-directed a production of Ntozake Shange's For Color Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. Can you talk about her language and how you feel her work should be positioned in the American theater canon?
Yes, yes. So, something that Ama Law, my co-director, who's the dance artist in residence there, something that she and I stressed, overly stressed, is the fact that Entozaki Shange is American Shakespeare, that her work is right up there. It is canon, it is American theater canon, but I dare say it is just theater canon. And what's interesting is so I teach for color girls in my Black theater and performance class, and a lot of the students, when they were reading it, they felt its significance, but they didn't wholeheartedly understand it until they came to see the show. And then when seeing it, they were like, "Oh, it makes so much sense." And I think that that is something that a lot of people feel with Shakespeare, that when you're reading it, it's like a mystery, a maze, a puzzle that cannot be deciphered. And then when you see it on stage, all of a sudden you understand the words because the poetry, the visuals, what the actors are doing, having that performed makes it clear and makes it all come together. It's just another reinforcement of the fact that Shakespeare, that Entozaki Shange, that For Color Girls is meant to be performed. Yes, you can read it and study it and theorize about it, but it's supposed to be performed on stage. You're supposed to see it live, breathing, so that you can laugh, so that you can cry, so that you can respond. And that's what makes it so active and so pivotal. The play was written in 19 what was it written? 1967? I mean, 1976. Play was written in 1976, and we're performing it in 2025, and all of the themes are immediately relevant and urgent. I don't know what that says about American culture, that we're still talking about the same things and dealing with the same disruptions and injustices. But the words are timeless. The words are timeless, just like Shakespeare.
Right.
So I say they are more timeless than Shakespeare, because if you look at some things, you're like, that was racist, in
Hello.
Shakespeare's time, in a way that when we're reading Entozaki, we understand the context of something. And even though some things may not be our way to describe something, she herself was always working on revisions. She updated the script and added more poems in 2010. So even though she is passed on now and has, ascended into ancestor, she was present and focused on the presence in terms of sharing these live stories about Black women.
Yeah, you talked about co-directing with Amala, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. What makes that collaboration work for the two of you?
Ama is my sister from another mister, for real. So, as I mentioned, she is our dance artist in residence. And so her focus in our collaborative process was really on the movement and the physical storytelling. and I was focused on the text and deciphering the language and helping our students kind of grasp that. And but sometimes the work that we did overlapped. If Amma was stuck or if I was stuck, we could depend on each other to just, bounce ideas off. But really the way that Amma was able to communicate the story through the physical, through the body, it's something that I just don't even know how to describe. She would have the actors do something, and it just made everything come together so clearly in a way that 1,000 words couldn't express what she was able to express in this one gesture. So the way that she's able to share stories and like enhance the beauty of the performers and Entozaki's words was just amazing, amazing. And really just to work with Amma, like after having worked with her and been with her every single day and been in the rehearsal room and talking outside, and now that I see her on campus, but it's not like how it was. I miss her so much. We just were right there, like a real like yin and yang, to just feed off of each other and try things and see what didn't work and laugh and cry. And it was like being with Fresh all over again. I just trust her fully. I trust her artistic vision fully. And I feel that she feels the same way about me. And sometimes she had an idea and I had an idea and our ideas conflicted, but we would still try them to see how we could combine them or see which one is the stronger choice in the long run. But because we didn't have like feelings in that sense of like you didn't do my thing, like it was never like that. We would try both ways. We pose them to the performers, and sometimes they would come up with something completely different, and that would be what ended up, in the final product. And she was just so open and giving and loving and joyful, and it was just so ideal. Like it should always be that way. We had so much fun, so much love.
It should always be that way. I love that. That's it. It should always be that way. And
Hmm.
that's an exemplar for how a rehearsal process should be, because in theory, we should be creating out of joy. But unfortunately, we find ourselves sometimes in situations where joy is not at the center of the rehearsal process. So I love that you and Amala created such a safe, beautiful, warm, and welcoming and trusting creative space for the rehearsal process. What about the designers and the other members of the production team? How do you extend that kind of collaborative energy to them as well?
So, our grad student designers, Sofia Olivar was our scenic designer, and Donnie Rotuno was our costume designer, and they're both MFA grad students at University of Maryland. Our sound designer was Sam Crawford, who is on faculty at UMD, and our lighting designer was John Alexander, who's a professional lighting designer out in these streets, who I'm sure you know, John. But
Absolutely.
thinking of the student designers in particular, we went through a long design process to figure out what the scenic should be. And what we spent all of last semester figuring out ended up changing entirely because of the budget. It was like twice the budget that we could do. And we went through it and it had this beautiful, like, back moving backdrop, and we were going to explore like different phases of the moon and how that affected the women on stage. And then they were like, oh, sorry, we can't do that, it's too expensive. So then we
Oh,
went back to the
no.
drawing board. I know, right? But Sophia, she was just such a trooper and just so focused on the playing space to help us share our story. And when you look at the set, the final design, it actually looked really simple. What she had instead of the moon, we focused then on the sun. And she had this large sun on stage that was able to be lit with LED tape. So it would reflect the different colors of whatever lady was speaking or the mood of the moment. And it would go up and down, and it was huge. And we also had a turntable that moved in the space, moved, like a record in the space. And it was just a platform with different levels that during the show some parts of it came apart and we were able to create another platform, another playing space. So when you see it, it was actually very, very simple, but the way we use the space to create the worlds and the scenes and the environments with this simple set, it actually informed what the actors were doing because we didn't want it to we wanted to center the performers and not the set. So she was really wonderful in that she was focused on the story and letting the scenic design take a backdrop because it's what was needed in order to support the language. And in that, the scene, the paint itself was very simple. It was beige and golds and just very subtle so that the costumes would pop. You know, she was a great collaborator with Donnie, our costume designer, because the costumes, the colors were so saturated that in that beige gold scenic design, the costumes just were so in your face and loud. And for the two student designers to be able to support each other in that way, with both of their designs ended up just looking extra like so stunning because they were just in communication and knew that the design was just a small part of the overall everything. You know, sometimes professionally designers are like, my costumes, my this, my that. And the costumes are in direct conflict with the set because the costumes are this color and the set is that color and whatever. Like, why be like that when we're all trying to like share the same story? So the fact that they were just so wonderful working together and just listening and changing and it the final result was stunning. It was really beautiful. And John's lighting design, forget it. You know, he really just knew how to let our students just come through. It was really, really outstanding.
Oh yeah. Well, I've worked with John several times. He's incredible.
Hmm.
He when I was there, he was definitely like, if you can't get John, I'm not sure if I want to do it. So like, and but that makes me think about the fact that wow, like you had professional slash faculty member, you had professional out in the field and students all working as a design team, which is interesting. Did you find that there was translation that had to happen?
You know, not really. Our MFA grads, while they are still learning, they're professional and they're already out in the field. And
Okay, they're already out there designing. So they're not
yeah,
okay. Yeah, that
yeah.
makes sense. So
So
it wasn't like they're just getting started. They're just
no.
honing their craft.
Yeah, they're honing their craft. Like Sophia, she is a third year, so she's about to graduate, and she was the set designer for a bicycle country last year. So I had worked with her before. And Donnie, I believe, is a second year, but her work is just outstanding. I don't know how she does the magic that she does. And working with Donnie, especially with our students, Donnie is white. I believe she is Italian American, but I'm not sure. But I know that she is not black. And she was so just outstanding with her research for the costumes and getting input from the cast themselves. Because in addition to fabric and textures and layers, she from the beginning was like, well, we need to have a budget for hair. Like, what is their hair going to be? How does that inform the look? What do they like? What don't they like? And we had somebody from the beginning knowing that the aesthetic, the Black women aesthetic, can that our hair is part of it, you know, whether we choose to
Absolutely.
shave it all off or have a big afro or have locks or whatever, that is part of our aesthetic and our experience. And so she had someone from the beginning. So she was able to speak with the actors and cater the look for each individual person. And I was just so humbled and blessed that they had these beautiful like natural hair looks with braids and afro puffs and you know silky locks and all of this that was a part of her design from the beginning. It wasn't an afterthought because if we really are here celebrating Black women, you have to know that our hair is part of our identity. And she was really wonderful about that.
Oh, that's great. That's so important. And just being able to see the different representations of Black women's hair, that range on stage is so powerful.
Yes.
So I love that. So you've been teaching for a number of years and directing students, engaging students with theater in a lot of different ways. How have your students' questions changed over the time from when you started teaching to now?
I like to think that my students' questions have evolved, have become more specific, in part because I know I have become more specific, but also I think not post, but because of COVID, because of Black Lives Matter, because of this general awareness of the world and not wanting to cause further harm, my students have become more thoughtful with the questions that they ask. And, in class, if they're portraying a character that they have, the character has an experience that the students themselves have not personally experienced, they are, they're asking questions about, well, what does this mean? And I looked this up, but I couldn't find this reference or whatever. They are more thoughtful in their creation because they know that the character is more than just something that is in a play, that there is somebody out there that relates to the journey of the character, and they want to do a good job. They want to represent it well. So the questions they ask are have evolved. It's not more like, well, how do you think this sounds? It's more like, what are you feeling when I tried this? What came across? What is clear? What is working? And yeah, the questions have evolved.
I'm glad to know that the specificity is coming there. And it's so interesting. I ask most educators who I talk to this some version of this question. And it's interesting that depending on where they are and who they're teaching, the questions change. So thank you for sharing that. So what upcoming projects are you excited about?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So still figuring out things for this summer. But what I'm looking towards for next year, directing at University of Maryland, is I'm actually directing Shakespeare's Macbeth, which
Aha.
I know I'm like, oh,
Nice.
so
Nice.
excited about it, so excited. And I just had my first design meeting yesterday, and we are speaking about world building, and we are setting it in like a not too distant dystopian future, and we're setting it in the United States. There's so many things in the play that speak directly to the challenging political and social times right here in our country. And even though I haven't told my designers specifically that I am thinking very, parable of a sower, like Octavia Butler, I haven't told them that specifically. I'm using that as my own research to kind of inform my choices. They're already coming with that, with costume elements and set design elements. So yes, we're still in the early stages. We just had our first design meeting, and our scenic designer is a first year MFA design student, Alondra Santos Castillo, and she is working towards this industrial design for our Macbeth. But she is setting it in kind of like a warehouse, like the remnants, the leftover of a warehouse, and we're looking at things that have fallen apart and crumbling spaces, and just what is a remnant of a time before, but it's a little bit like not. So we don't yet know. We're still kind of working what the warehouse was, what the factory was. But basically, we're not using palaces and homes. We're using industrial, cold type of spaces to create this world. So yeah, anyway, I'm so premature in speaking about it because we are in the early design phases. But for next year, that is going to be the big show from my standpoint, Shakespeare's Macbeth at UMD.
That's so exciting to, we talked a lot in this conversation to think about Black women at the center and a Black woman at the helm and Black female leadership, Black female, I was going to say dominance. And I think I'm going to stick with that. I like that word. And just interpreting this story. And I can't wait to see what you do with that piece. It's such an important time for us to be fully realizing ourselves as storytellers. And I'm glad that you're engaging with all kinds of work. You talk about our bard in Tazaki Shange, and then the European
Hmm.
bard Shakespeare, who we're all, of course, obviously influenced by, but don't have to completely center. I say as I think about the name of my podcast. And I just really love the way you approach your work. I'm grateful for everything that you've been doing in the field and your impact. And I'm excited to see what you do next.
Thank you. Thank you. Me too. Me too.
Is there anything else that you want to say?
I mean, really, just thank you. I love that you are doing this and that you are bringing such joy and I can't wait to like listen to this, but also to listen to your other ones and be really intentional to make sure I saw the one that was released for Kita. I can't wait to listen to that because I know she has such a fascinating story. So thank you for your work and really just highlighting all the beautiful artistry that is happening in our community around the country.
The pleasure is mine. I love these conversations so much, and thank you for joining me today. So that's it, everybody. This is Key Bard. I'm Tembi, and till next time.
Thank you.
Keyboard is produced, directed, and hosted by Tembi Duncan. Theme music produced by Psycho Sid. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, follow, leave a review, or give us a 5-star rating. Your support helps the show reach more listeners, and it means the world to me. Thank you for listening.